My name is Adele Nazarian, and I will be this evening's host for the Iranian Americans for Liberty's 6th virtual Congressional Meet and Greet of 2021. The Iranian Americans for Liberty are a bipartisan group of Iranian Americans from all over the nation that are working together to support and strengthen U.S. foreign policy and national security solutions that bring democracy, human rights accountability, and freedom of speech to Iranians living under the oppressive, totalitarian Islamic Republic of Iran regime. Please visit our website at www.ia4l.org, that was one W too much, to learn more about our organization. Please be advised that this event is for educational purposes only. This evening, we are truly honored to be joined by our special guest, Minnesota Congressman Jim Hagedorn, for a live Q&A. Before we get started, I would like to read a short bio about this evening's special guest. Congressman Jim Hagedorn was born in Blue Earth, Minnesota in 1962 to Tom and Kathleen. His formative years were spent on a 160-acre grain and livestock farm outside of Truman. Jim was part of a rich family tradition of farming, with his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather all being southern Minnesota farmers. Jim and his sisters gained firsthand understanding of farming and small business. He helped work the land, work the bean fields, feed the hogs, maintain the property, and appreciate country living and small town values. On January 3rd, 2019, Jim was sworn in to represent Minnesota's 1st District in the U.S. House of Representatives. The 1st District includes 21 counties from South Dakota to Wisconsin, along the Iowa border. Jim serves on the House committees on agriculture and small business to promote farming, Main Street enterprises, and Southern Minnesota's rural way of life. Congressman Hagedorn, thank you so much for joining us. We would like to turn it over to you for your brief opening remarks before we start our Q&A.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor to be with you, and thank you for the nice introduction. I do represent Southern Minnesota in Congress, and the committees of jurisdiction don't necessarily line up with a very important foreign policy issue, as you've been promoting with your group, but I can assure you that it takes strength in numbers and a coalition in the House and Senate to get bills through to help our friends and allies around the world. You know, the reason I got into politics, for the most part, elected politics, is because I thought our country was in big trouble. And the way we put it together with our forefathers, you know, the Democrats were trying to move it the wrong direction. So got into politics. I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of the issues, but it's just a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Congressman. The pleasure is truly ours. Let's jump right into our Q&A. So for our first question, we'd like to ask you to share it with our audience. What is your why? Why do you wake up every day to fight for your constituents in our nation's capital?
Well, I do think the country's at a crossroads, the United States of America, between the way the forefathers envisioned freedom, liberty, opportunity, and something that we see with the Democrats, pure socialism that could move towards Marxism. And the way it works right now in Washington, it's very evenly split. It doesn't seem that way because Democrats are controlling a lot of the power. But they're in the House, we're only 5 seats down. We just need 5 seats to get back the majority. The Senate is 50-50. And the race for president came down to 46,000 votes in just 3 states. So we're pretty evenly divided. And I would say that people are on our side with the issues. But right now, the Democrats are controlling the ball. What we've seen out of the Biden administration so far does not look good for the future of our country. We're seeing a lot of the achievements made by President Trump and Republicans the last 4 years thrown out the door. We were projecting American strength and values around the world, didn't put one more troop on the ground in order to fight any wars, and yet we were still protecting our allies, defending our values, and promoting peace in regions like the Middle East. We were defending our borders and had merit-based immigration. That hadn't happened in my lifetime. It certainly hadn't happened in your lifetime. You're a very young person compared to me. But and then you look at the economy, the strongest economy in our nation's history, with the lowest recorded unemployment, and the people who quote unquote had been left behind in the past, well, they were doing better than ever. And we did that because we had low taxes, less regulations, low cost energy, and trade deals like USMCA that made sense, not just for the rest of the world, but for the United States too. And then our basic values were being implemented: the right to life, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to religious freedom. Those are the things that I've been fighting for, that I fought for with President Trump, things I'll try to hang on to moving forward with my colleagues in the House and the Senate. And, I think we have a big battle ahead of us, but I do know the people are on our side.
Thank you so much. America's national debt continues to climb, and the numbers are, they just should make every single American sick to their stomachs. We applaud you for recently proposing an amendment to the $1.9 trillion spending bill to restore financial responsibility and preserve taxpayer dollars. Unfortunately, your amendment was blocked. I think we can all agree that federal spending is absolutely out of control. What can you and your colleagues do to rein in the spending?
Well, it is out of control. And the problem is with a $30 trillion national debt, at some point it's going to unravel. And when it does, it's not going to be good for the working people of this country and the people on fixed incomes. And when you think about it, right now we're financing that incredible debt with about 1% interest payments. What happens when interest payments ratchet up to 4 and 5% historical averages like that? It's going to be a disaster, and we're going to have to pay upwards of $1.5 trillion just on interest of the debt. So, what I saw come out of the Democrats here this last month or so with this so-called reconciliation bill, they said it was for COVID relief. It was for Democrat crony relief. That's all it was. 1.9 trillion, just a mere fraction of that, less than 10% was going to go towards something health related. And then on top of all that, said, oh, we need another 150 billion for schools to open them up. Only 6 billion was going to be spent this year. It really was kind of an exploitation of the whole COVID virus in order for the Democrats to get a bunch of big spending stuff through Congress to reward their cronies. I'm very disappointed that it passed. It's going to be tough for the country, but we're just going to have to keep fighting.
Thank you, Congressman. Your commitment to advocating for your district's agricultural community, it's truly amazing. And you should really be a role model for many members of Congress, any that have farmers in their district. Please tell us a little bit about some of the ways that you will continue to advocate for your district's agricultural community.
Farmers for many years have had tough times, low commodity prices, high input costs. Republicans under President Trump were doing their best in order to fix the taxes, regulations, the energy costs, and trade. We made great gains in that area. But the whole purpose of the Farm Bill and the Agriculture Committee is to sustain farmers when times are tough and make sure that they have a good economic climate in order to do their business. And a lot of that has to do with trade deals like USMCA. I knew that if we could champion that, get it through Congress, start that deal with Mexico and Canada, then we'd be in a position to do deals like that with China. We have something going with Japan, of course, now, Great Britain down the road, India, countries like that. And so we're going to continue to advocate for that. Hopefully the Democrats will join us because those are good policies. But our farmers and agribusinesses are incredible. They provide an array of quality products at low cost that we can walk into the grocery store. Think about it. Have you ever really worried when you walked into the grocery store that there would be food on the shelves, that you would have all the products and wants and needs that you would have at an affordable price? So we don't want to do things that are going to undermine that system of agriculture. And so my biggest deal is to help the farmers keep going and then to support our rural communities. The rural communities are under a lot of stress. And when farmers have to sell out and go out of business, that means fewer people working the land and living in those communities like I grew up in Truman. And so we're going to keep doing what we can to support the people of my district and many, many millions of people across the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, people don't really, everyday Americans sometimes don't realize and they forget how the agricultural community industry directly impacts them more than they could ever imagine. So thank you. During the 2020 campaign cycle, law enforcement was a major issue all throughout the country. Can you please tell us a little bit more about your record as it relates to supporting law enforcement?
Well, I've always supported and defended the police. I mean, unfortunately, the majority party right now wants to defund them, defang them, demean them, destroy the police across this country. And what we saw under President Obama with Ferguson, that was kind of the first step where it really got tough for our police officers across the nation. But then with this riot in Minneapolis and then the riots all across the country, we literally had city councils defunding police and people blaming the police for just going out and doing their jobs. We all know when a police officer makes a mistake, does something wrong, we want that police officer prosecuted, to the extent of the law, but 99 point whatever 9% of them are just doing heroic work day in and day out, protecting and serving our communities. So I've always defended law enforcement. I've got their backs. And one of the bad bills that really has already come up here in this Congress just in this last month was a bill that Nancy Pelosi brought to the floor that would take away qualified immunity from our police officers. They would have to go out and get private insurance. They would have to, risk perhaps their whole livelihood, their homes and everything else just to go do their job. They have to make split-second decisions sometimes, and in order to try to save life, including their own. And we don't want them to have to think twice and three times about that. We want them to go out and do their job, get trained up, do it as best they can. Hopefully, if they make a mistake, they're going to be held accountable. But we don't want them to lose everything just for being a police officer. And in fact, many of them would quit. And it's already very difficult for our smaller communities to attract and retain talent to be police officers. This would just exacerbate it. So I don't support that. I supported the Republican alternative offered by my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber. We can do common sense reforms, but what the Democrats did was just anti-police.
Thank you, Congressman. We agree that supporting law enforcement is absolutely a non-negotiable. Let's talk a little bit about your committee assignments. Currently, you're sitting on the House's Agricultural and Small Business Committees. In a recent study released by the Small Business Administration, we learned that 47.5% of America's workforce are employees of small businesses. That's almost half. First of all, congratulations on these two prestigious committee assignments. Can you please tell us a little bit more about how you can help America's small businesses?
Well, I'll tell you, right, you're right. The small business is the backbone of our economy in many respects, and it's the job creator of our economy. And we saw how tough it's been on small business just this last year going through the coronavirus. Our committee, the Small Business Committee, stepped up with the Paycheck Protection Program, which is helping small businesses get from one side of the coronavirus to the other and employ their employees, keep them employed. That was really, really, really effective. And I think we've done a good job. More still needs to be done and is being done for our restaurants, hospitality industry, maybe even the airlines that are still struggling. But for the most part, lots of the businesses made it through. Unfortunately, some of them still didn't. And it's tough to own a small business. It's tough to run it. And what we need less of, I'm just going to say this flat out, we need less taxes on our small business folks. That tax relief that passed under President Trump and Republicans in Congress was very, very good for small business and really created a lot of the growth that we've had here in the last few years. And less regulation. Small business people will tell you the regulations just eat up their bottom line and force them to spend more time doing regulations. Ask the community bankers, they're small businesses. They'll tell you that all day long. A lot of them went out of business because of the regulations. And then low cost energy. If you can buy things on the cheap, fuel, electricity, transportation cost, the whole 9 yards, it really helps. And then good trade deals. So, we're going to continue to do what we have to. And the small businesses are very critical to our rural communities. If they go broke, you lose your grocery store in your small town, you lose your town. And so we'll be doing that. On agriculture, we touched on it again, but a lot of it is rural development. This thing called rural broadband. We want to make sure that everybody in America has access to the internet. It sounds crazy, but there are a lot of people in rural areas that don't have it. There are some in urban areas that don't have it. And it's a quality of life issue. It's an infrastructure issue that has to be there for everyone. It's like water or electricity now. So, in bipartisan fashion, we've supported many bills to do that, and I'll keep pushing to make sure that everybody in the country has the same opportunities.
Wonderful. We've covered some domestic issues, so let's switch over to some foreign policy questions. As
Sure.
you know, thank you. As you know, the Islamic Republic of Iran constantly chants death to America and death to Israel, the great and small Satans. Why do you think the current administration is so eager to loosen economic sanctions on the regime, and when they clearly do not like the United States of America or our allies?
Well, for whatever reason, the Biden administration is looking to reverse course on pretty much everything that President Trump accomplished, all the good things, whatever. And I mean, just look at the border. He's down there unraveling the southern border, and now we have a major crisis, humanitarian crisis. and doing catch and release and all this stuff. It's terrible. And but foreign policy is the same way. I admired President Trump's foreign policy as much as anyone since President Reagan. And President Reagan had a resolve about him to go after and defeat the communists. He was fairly tough on the Iranian regime too, the mullahs, the Islamic dictators. But not since President Reagan have we had a president that really understood kind of what he wanted to accomplish. Look at the peace deals that we have in the Middle East because of President Trump. I mean, who would have ever thought that you could get those adversaries of Israel together to shake hands and sign agreements? And by doing that, it puts a lot of pressure on Iran. It really puts them in a box. And then the president's sanctions and getting out of that, what I think was a very failed Iran deal. That was brilliant policy making. And we had the Iranian dictatorship on the run. They were weakened when President Trump arrived because of the mistakes of President Obama. The Iranians were in many ways the ideological, military, and other, kind of the power brokers in that region. And it all was turned around. So I'm very disappointed in the Biden administration. I'm very concerned for our country and for world peace.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to go along with that, many elected officials were really highly critical of President Trump and the previous administration for their decision to carry out a drone strike that killed former IRGC General Qasem Soleimani. And you were not critical of this decision at all. Please tell us a little bit more about why you supported this action. And is the world a safer place with Qasem Soleimani gone?
Yeah, I think we had a vote on this on the House floor. I supported the president. That guy Soleimani, he was responsible for killing a lot of American soldiers. And a lot of people don't realize that when we were in Iraq trying to clean that place up, whether you thought it was a good war or a bad war, a lot of U.S. troops were being killed by Iranians. And certainly Iranians were providing the weaponry and resources needed for others to kill our troops, the IEDs and everything else. So that Soleimani was a bad character. I think the president, he took swift action when he had the opportunity. I think that's why a lot of Americans really, really care for President Trump, because he would stand up and put America first and the needs of our allies first, and not worry so much about the bad guys and the enemies of the United States. So the world is a much better place without Soleimani.
For our next question, let's focus on the current presidential administration. As you might know, the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, stated a couple of weeks ago that the Iranian regime has a long pathway to obtaining enough uranium for a nuclear weapon. But roughly 1 week after making that statement, he said that the regime is only a mere weeks away from obtaining enough uranium for a nuclear weapon. What do you make of these mixed signals?
Well, I think the Biden administration is looking for a way back to reinstate the Iran deal. And that would be a huge mistake. I mean, the worst part of the Iran deal wasn't, I mean, these are all bad things, but they gave them $150 billion. They kind of locked them into a position where they would be able to build a nuclear weapon in about 10 years, just the opposite of what everybody wanted. And then they had these side agreements that even John Kerry hadn't read, didn't even know about, couldn't even talk about, and they were bad news. But the biggest problem I had with the Iran deal is that it would effectively make it so that you could never ever put pressure on the regime and make it go away, so that the freedom-loving people of Iran could take their country back. I'm not talking about U.S. troops going in there and doing the job. I'm talking about the freedom-loving people of Iran. And there are people back there that can remember the way it was under the Shah. Shah was not a perfect guy, but there were lots of liberty compared to what they have, lots of opportunity, especially for women. And it's terrible what's happened to the folks in these last 30, 40 years in Iran. But if we had had that Iran deal in place continuously, what happens? You can never threaten them, because once they get a nuclear weapon, you can't put any pressure on them. I think that we should consider arming freedom fighters to go after the dictatorship. I think we should have a internet and radio free Iran to get freedom into that country and let people hear it and see it for themselves. There are things that we can do, and we need to continue putting those sanctions on and putting the pressure and denying them capital that they need to do their terrorist ways. And we certainly don't need this Iran deal.
Yeah, to add on to what you were saying, I don't know if I have the quote exactly, but I know that Ayatollah Khamenei, the current supreme leader, had said, "Don't be fearful of America's weapons or guns. Be fearful of their music and their fashion, because it's a cultural war." So,
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And when the Iranians, before the dictatorship took over, the extremist radical Muslim dictatorship, when they could trade with the world, sell us their oil, sell us crops like pistachios, when they were engaging with their neighbors, it was a way more peaceful experience for everybody. And it certainly was so much better for the people of Iran. I think there's a big underlying faction of folks there today that long for freedom and would be allies to the United States. And for most people, they don't see that, they don't understand it. But I believe it's there. I'm not an expert. You're more of an expert. Maybe you can help me with that. But that's my goal. That's my vision for Iran.
well, you're absolutely correct. The freedom-loving people of Iran do love America, and they do respect individuals like yourself who are truly fighting for them. So, thank you. It is, sorry, not COVID. It is it is widely known that the Islamic Republic of Iran funds terrorism all around the world. In recent years, the regime provided support to Hamas in Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and many more terrorists the world over. In Israel, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad were responsible for numerous deadly attacks, originating in Gaza and the West Bank, including attacks against Israeli civilians in the Sinai Peninsula. What can Congress continue to do to freeze the regime's finances that fuel terrorism around the world?
Well, see, what you're talking about is exactly why Obama shouldn't have given them $150 billion cash, so they could take that money and turn it into weapons and help their terrorist friends all around the world, particularly in that region. And why we ended up under Hillary Clinton getting into wars in places like Libya and Yemen, because Iran was causing a lot of mischief. I support sanctions. I don't support any of this stuff where they're going to unravel Trump's policies. And the fact of the matter is, the Iranians are in a corner right now, and for whatever reason, Biden seems to want to let them out of it. And you just got to keep them there and keep pushing, because they're losing a lot. What's going to happen when the rest of these countries basically shake hands with Israel and say, "Okay, we don't want any war. Let's have peace. We don't need this." It's going to isolate Iran more and more and more. And for whatever reason, they want to give them the prestige of negotiating directly with the United States, reinstating the Iran deal, having access to capital. It doesn't make any sense. I just don't understand. I don't understand what Joe Biden and his administration are thinking.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because this re-entering the JCPOA is only going to further embolden dictatorships like Assad's in Syria. And today is actually the 10-year anniversary of the genocide against the Syrian people there. So, absolutely so much to be concerned about for many people the world over. So, as we discussed, the regime in Iran spends billions of dollars funding terrorism around the world. This is an issue that most Iranians in Iran do not support. They would rather see billions spent on building infrastructure, roads, and schools. What is your message to the people of Iran that might be listening to this event? Do you stand with the people of Iran in their quest for freedom from the tyrannical regime in their country?
Totally. I have since the day that Jimmy Carter basically let the dictatorship take root. And it was a sad day for freedom around the world, a real sad day for the people of Iran. I can't imagine what it is living under such a despotic regime, with little freedom, and the way people are abused, and to have what feels like no hope. They should have some hope, in the sense that in most times, people like ourselves in the United States are not just cheering them on, but doing everything possible to position that country for the fall of that despotic regime, and to have free people rise up, and to have some level of democracy and liberty for the people. We know they long for it. We have to support them. We can never give in and lock in that dictatorship, which is what they would do if they go ahead and put them on a path to getting a nuclear weapon. And we can never again give them any more capital to continue to solidify their position in the region as a power broker. So yeah, we're with the people 100%. And it would be quite something if we could ever have freedom there, like we had in Eastern Europe and other places. It is possible, but it takes vision, foresight, and a lot of resolve by great leaders around the country, around the world. And one of those I thought was President Trump was doing a good job. And it's too bad he didn't have another 4 years in a row there to take it on. Who knows what we might have seen?
Absolutely. If it's okay with you, let's shift back for a moment to your work in the People's House. Members of the squad, like Ilhan Omar and Rita Tlaib, have set their sights on one of America's strongest allies in the region, Israel. They are widely considered to be the de facto leaders of the BDS movement in America, the
Yeah,
boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
yeah.
Why do you think Representatives Omar and Tlaib are so critical of the world's only Jewish state while ignoring the humanitarian violations that happen every week in Iran and all around the world?
Well, I can't speak for them, but we've seen a very anti-Israel attitude by many of my colleagues in the House on the Democrat side, and of course, lots of actors around the world who are part of the UN, and we see it on display almost every day they're in session. It's very sad. This whole divestiture movement, it needs to be stopped in its tracks. We need to speak out against it. Israel has been a great ally of the United States. I think they are a beacon of hope and freedom in that region. Do they do everything perfect? No, no country does. But I think what is going on with the Abraham Accords and others, where we're bringing countries together, we're making it more stable, we're making it more peaceful. Those are great accomplishments. And you know, a country isn't going to do that if they don't really want peace. When they sit there and shake hands with, you know, what were their mortal enemies for many decades now, and turn around and make that happen. So it's disappointing. I think in the House we still have the votes to stop that stuff. And when we bring it up for a vote, usually the people that are behind the divestiture movement are embarrassed. But it's unfortunate that that sentiment even exists in the United States House of Representatives.
Absolutely. Um, so, the Department of Justice, the DOJ, recently arrested and charged a political scientist author for acting as an unregistered agent of the Iranian government. For over a decade, Kaveh Afrasiabi pitched himself to Congress, journalists, and the American public as a neutral and objective expert on Iran while receiving payments from Iran for his efforts. Sadly, there are many other individuals like Afrasiabi all throughout the United States, and they are a threat to our national security and our nation. And um, can you, so I'd love to know, we have been told that you are signing onto a letter, I believe, that Congresswoman Harrell is led the efforts to go to the DOJ, and that you are signing it in order to stop individuals like Afrasiabi from being able to infiltrate our country. Could you please tell us why you are supporting it?
Well, I appreciate my colleague Representative Harrell from New Mexico taking that on and showing some leadership. I mean, it's just common sense. We need to stand up, and particularly when we have enemies and people are trying to infiltrate, trying to do terrible things in our country, violating our laws. We need to stand up, root that out, prosecute them, kick them out, do whatever we have to do in order to protect the country and protect the cause of freedom. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I'm glad that it would happen in that case, but they really need to be more vigilant. If it happened once, it probably happened 10 or 20 times that we don't even know about right now. So you can count on me to support that type of work by the Department of Justice and others.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Okay, Congressman, so here's our final question, and we think you're going to like it. Please tell us, if you could have dinner with any two deceased individuals, who would they be and where would that dinner take place?
Well, I'll keep it in the political arena. If I did just anybody that I've known or whatever, it would be my grandfather who passed away when I was fairly young, who fought in World War I. He was a true hero. And he would be somebody I'd like to sit down with now as an adult and ask him more questions about what his life was like, and you know, and just trying to get to know him better. But since this is politics, you know, my hero growing up was always President Reagan. And I had the opportunity to meet him in the Oval Office and in Mankato, Minnesota, in our district. Met him a couple of times. A really nice guy. But it would be nice to have dinner with him, spend some more time. And another fellow that I never was able to meet that I was saying would be really neat was Rush Limbaugh, who just passed away. And I think what we would do is we'd get President Reagan and Rush Limbaugh and myself, and we'd have dinner at Mar-a-Lago down there in Florida, and we'd invite that other guy, President Trump, along, and I think it would be a heck of a thing. And when you think about it, Mr. Limbaugh kind of, he brought the two eras together, the Reagan conservatism, and he moved it into the Trump populism. He was kind of in the middle, keeping us all together. And I really respected what he did as an entertainer, but more importantly, somebody that really had his finger on the pulse and understood what was best for the people. And he helped us win a lot of elections, and he helped move the country almost probably as much as the presidents did, Trump and Reagan. But that would be the three I'd want to sit down with.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Congressman. We've reached our time limit for today's conversation. On behalf of Iranian Americans for Liberty, I would like to thank you for taking the time to connect with our audience and community. I'd like to also give you the opportunity to provide a brief closing remark before we wrap up. Tell us, please, what is your message to the Iranian American community?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And my message is this: we stand for freedom. We stand with the Iranian community and all the people back in Iran that strive for liberty and opportunity and everything that we have in this country that our founding fathers fought for and created with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. And until the people of Iran have that opportunity of self-governing and the opportunity to live in freedom and be part of the world community again, we're not going to rest. And so we need to keep the faith, as you'd say, be vigilant, and continue to push every policy in Washington that will put pressure on that regime in order to one day, hopefully, have it so the people of Iran can have their country back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Hagedorn. The Iranian Americans for Liberty, thank you, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. Our next virtual event will be held on March 24th with another special guest, Congressman Andrew Garabino from New York. Please visit www.ia4l.org to register for this event. Until next time, I'm Adele Nazarian. Have a great evening.